Europe will be opening up their external borders for summer travel beginning on July 1st. But there's a few exceptions, and one of them is that Americans will be barred from entering. This is an interesting turn of events because it may spark more tensions between the US and their foreign allies. We're going to cover all of this today on the Tonic Accord podcast. Hey everybody, I hope your day's going well. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord. I'm Alex, joined by my friend and co-host Drew. What's up, man?
Hey, what's up? What's up? We kind of had a cloudy day, first one in a while down here, so it's not 90 degrees and hot. And yeah, man, I'm just still staying inside as much as I can at least. And when I do go outside, I'm wearing a mask and just trying to stay sane in these crazy times.
Yeah, that's good. It's cooled off. I was just thinking about this in the shower that I feel like 2018, 2019, it was like everyone's like, "Oh, I'm thriving," And I think it's gone from thriving to 2020's message is I'm surviving.
Yep.
Like just kind of get through it, We're only halfway through, but wear the mask, keep your head up and keep moving. Yeah. So today I just wanted to talk well, first about the European travel ban, because I think it's interesting that, for the last several years the US has been talking about all these travel bans and immigration bans, and now ironically Europe is now afraid to allow us to begin entering the country once they're allowing other countries to do so. And now we are on a list with countries like Brazil and Russia. All three countries, ourselves included, have handled this coronavirus epidemic or pandemic horribly. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame the EU. I think it's a bummer, right? I think it's a bummer for those, whoever had plans to go to Europe or whatever. But it makes sense, given that, the United States has seen some record new case days recently, a few days ago. We flattened the curve and then the curve's going back up again, whereas other countries, some in Europe, have actually maintained and really flattened their curve and kind of reduced their new cases. I can see why, like we always say every week, everyone's eager to get back to normal, but at least some of these European countries have the numbers to allow them to get back to normal, and they don't want to risk that. They don't want to risk Americans coming in with our current situation and messing it up. And let's not forget that the United States had a travel ban from Europe itself, right? So it's a two-way street. And we also had a travel ban from China earlier in the pandemic. So, this is a tool that is being used by everybody. And the EU just feels that, the United States, and like you said, the United States, Brazil, and Russia, based off the factual numbers we're seeing, have not handled it as well, or at least there's a big upspike in cases. So to me, it makes sense. It is a bummer, but I think it's well within the EU's, they have their right and authority to do so, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, I agree. Just from my personal experience, being in Europe, they have taken it more seriously, and there's obviously been political division on it. I mean, you definitely had people protesting the lockdowns towards the end, but I think there was more of this shared idea of we need to get through this together. We're going to wear masks. We're going to distance. And yeah, they've kind of done the time, and the numbers are showing that they are, at least for now, there's no second wave as of this moment. And so I don't blame them particularly. Now, what I do have to say is that I'm not too really concerned about this for the United States either, because according to Business Insider, the individual European countries can review every 2 weeks the countries that they want to allow to enter.
Right.
So it's not like it's not like U.S. citizens are just barred for the whole summer, right? Like if things change or get better, and I guess their primary benchmark is having an average of one new infection per 100,000. No, sorry. For the EU, that number is 16 right now, and for the US, it's 107. So the US has about 10 times as many cases per 100,000, and so it makes sense to me. And so I think they're doing the right thing. Now, I'm a little bit worried about, first off, the image for the US on an international scale, and also just the politics of it, because obviously it's no mystery that we've been separating and getting more divided between us and Europe for several years under Trump. And I think this is just another thing that's kind of dividing us across the Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely doesn't bode well when, Canada is now allowed. Like Canadians are going to be soon to be allowed to go back to the EU, and Americans aren't. For further dividing between Trump and then the rest of what you would consider like the Western established democracies, right? Germany, France, UK, Canada, etc. So to have Canada kind of be welcomed back to the lunch table, but not the United States, it's one, obviously it's primarily for the health of the Europeans, so sure. But it also is a slap to face to Trump in the United States of like, hey, you guys didn't handle this well, and now you're in company with Russia and Brazil, right? Russia and Brazil have both also taken this has been overblown issue. Bolsonaro has been very not very active in his response against coronavirus, and people have paid for it. Brazil is flaring up. It's just a shame. Now, will this travel ban make sure that the EU is always protected? No, I don't think so. And in fact, I think it's mainly going to just delay a second wave, because I looked at a study that the World Health Organization did probably about a decade ago, looking at H1N1. Now, of course, that's a different virus with a very different story, and it had not nearly the impact of coronavirus did. But they looked at what travel bans from Mongolia and other places did to stop infections, and it mostly said, look, their conclusion was basically that if you're not willing to really restrict like 99% of travel, then really all you really are doing is delaying it. And I'll read the results verbatim. This is published in 2014, so forgive me. 6 years ago. The results of our systematic review indicate that overall travel restrictions have only limited effectiveness in the prevention of influenza spread, particularly those in high transmissibility scenarios, right? So coronavirus is considered a high transmissibility scenario. So the effect, the effect varies according to the timeliness of the restrictions, right? That's a big thing, right? A lot of experts are now saying we were weeks late to our responses, including travel bans and restrictions. But they also said, you have to basically restrict travel over 90% of travel to have any meaningful impact and effect on reducing the magnitude of epidemics. So I think at this point, the travel ban is not to contain anymore, right? The cat is out of the bag. I think what it is it's aiming at delaying and not not overwhelming medical institutions. If they start letting back countries that are doing well now back into the tourism and travel, eventually when they do have Americans come back, there probably will be a spike in coronavirus, but they will have flattened their curve enough and maybe have more hospital beds ready to be ready for it. So I don't this is not a panacea to their problem, of course not, but it will delay and stall kind of the inevitable resurgence when the world does open up again.
Yes, no, I think that's a really good take, and it's clear, like you said. I don't think the end goal is to completely just eradicate this virus, because that'd be impossible. But yeah, I mean, they've flattened their curve, we haven't, and they don't want to see just a giant uptick in cases, and like I'd mentioned earlier, each EU country can review every 2 weeks, right? And so I see probably down the road countries like maybe, for example, Greece and Italy that are very reliant on tourism. I could potentially see them allowing Americans and other maybe more risk countries to enter just because they're so reliant on tourism. Well, I could imagine, Northern Europe, say Germany, the Netherlands, Belgium, countries like that aren't as reliant on this foreign money, that maybe will be more stringently locked down. So I think it's going to be interesting to see, because, let's be honest, tourism is crucial during these summer months, and Americans are some of the people that travel the most. So the unfortunate thing is that Northern Europe, I think, can easily just say, okay, we're closing our borders to Americans. But I'm just curious if it's going to cause more tension maybe inside of the EU in Southern Europe, where these countries do say, hey, we need these tour boat or cruise ships full of Americans, And the New York Times had some interesting numbers where, American Airlines, which we just bailed out, not the company American Airlines, but the American Airlines companies, we just bailed them out, and it looks like they could have a huge loss because of this. Like they were saying, United could lose about 7.4 billion, Delta 6.4 billion, and American Airlines 4.6 billion. So just on the economic side, it's not going to be good because, I mean, obviously airlines make most of their money with international flights. So it's going to be tough. But I do agree with you that I think unless you limit almost all travel, it's going to be really difficult to contain this. And that's kind of what we saw even back in March, right? I mean, the U.S., shut our borders off to China, which I applauded the Trump administration for doing. And it bought us a little time, but we didn't use that time. We wasted that time. And so we're kind of back to where we were, So I don't know, it's going to be interesting. What I do want to ask you is, because what I've been also hearing involving this is some people on the left and the right have been talking, obviously not every state in the United States has been affected the same, right? Like you have right now Texas, Arizona, Florida, but then you have other states like Massachusetts that have very low amounts of new cases. Do you think that it would almost be smart to potentially look into banning some forms of domestic travel if it's from high-risk areas?
I mean, that's really tricky, right? That's super tricky because, like we a lot of people like to point at like the spring breakers down in Florida beaches as like, oh, look at them. Like, can't you just not take your vacation, right? And that's valid. But that's not always what domestic travel is in the United States. Sometimes it's people moving. Sometimes it's people getting new jobs. Sometimes it's, people visiting, ill family and stuff, right? So there's a lot of different, like it's not just people don't just travel around the United States just for, pleasure. What about trucking industries, right? What if, you would have to exempt some things if you were to go that route? You would have to exempt some things like truckers, or else you'd just be you'd be hurting the economy even more. I'm not sure what I'm not sure what the solution is, right? But, I don't know. I mean, like, because you also have to think of the chain, right? Like, let's, like, for example, back to Europe, right? Let's say, okay, Americans can't go to Germany, and Germany's less reliant on tourism, but Greece is, and Greece decides to open up to Americans. Well, Americans go to Greece, give it to a Greek guy who then goes to Germany, right? You could have a lot of internal conflict of like, hey, you're opening up to Americans and Russians and Brazilians, which is actually putting us at risk, even though we decided against it. I can see that tension happening, and I can see that, like you said, a lot of tension in between separate states, right? Like states like, Florida that have not taken it seriously, in my opinion. Neighboring states and even non-neighboring states that get travel from people can be upset about this. That's why I think it's a shame that we haven't had a more spearheaded federal response, right? I mean, Trump even said it himself, like, leave it up to the governors. And that's what's going to happen, is you're going to have these states with different responses and different statistics. And now I think what's happening is, we had that massive beginning in New York with Manhattan, but New York's actually flattened their curve for now, at least. And it's spreading into the more rural areas that have not taken it as seriously, like Texas and Mississippi and the Midwest, that have all seen spikes. And now Texas is thinking they'll have to roll back some of their openings. Here in California as well, they've had to roll back some of their openings. Bars are now closed again as of like last night. And so I think it's just what you said earlier, is like, we had travel bans early, but then it bought us time, but we wasted that time, and we haven't had a clear, like leadership on what to do, and it's been left up to the states. And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's not. And it looks like it's ended up not being a good thing because of the high transmissibility of this. Even if one state does everything right, if the next state next to it doesn't matter, because people are going to move around.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. And on your first point, going back to how it would be really tough to, limit interstate travel, in the EU or in the United States, I agree with you. I think it would be divisive. It would be hard, and it would be hard to get uniformity to it. The one thing I do think is interesting, because I was kind of looking at this, and during the smallpox era, late 1800s, early 1900s, there were a few Supreme Court cases that actually looked at interstate travel and if states can ban, say, someone from Florida going to Georgia. And I guess technically, if there's a national crisis, states do have the ability to enforce laws and special quarantine laws to control the spread of a contagion. There was a case in 1902, and I'm going to butcher this, it's a French name. It was Compagnie Française de Navigation à Vapeur versus the Board of Health of the state of Louisiana. And they basically decided that unless Congress has uniform laws or exercises its power on the subject, states can do this. They can, enforce interstate quarantines. They can limit travel. And so, what I think would almost be smart is what we're starting to actually see when people say in New York or New Jersey we're going to other like neighboring states, is there were forced 14-day quarantines for visitors who had been in New York or New Jersey or Florida. It's not the same thing as saying, okay, if you're working or you're doing essential travel, you're not saying people can't travel. But at the same time, if you've been in a high risk area, maybe you do need to be told to stay at home for 14 days. Something like that, where it's not just limiting travel, but it's trying to find somewhat of a middle ground. Because it's true, like you said, I think the first part of this was all inner cities, or not inner cities, but just cities in general, which makes sense. Airline travel from other countries. You had Washington, LA, New York, all hotspots. But now we're kind of seeing that there's just this community spread. And I think we do need to have a conversation between the states of what to do. But I don't know how we could do that, because we're so divided and so politicized. And I almost think doing something like interstate bans could almost just be another step in this kind of culture war and division that could almost just divide the country further. So who knows?
Yeah, I mean, it would certainly get protested a lot if you completely shut off the borders of a state, whether people are trying to get in or get out. People are going to be upset, very upset. And again, like you said, it's already so politicized, and there's so many tensions in this country already that, that might be another straw on the camel's back. Yeah. It's really tough. It's a really tough situation, but but that's why it does make sense to me, especially internationally, why the EU has put the United States on a list with Brazil and Russia. And it goes to show, like, we have all this political infighting in our own country, but you look at the bigger picture. Look at the globe. We're doing poorly compared to other countries now.
Yeah.
I mean, like we're really doing poorly compared to other countries' responses, and now we're lumped in with Russia and Brazil. And frankly, that's not exactly good company. I mean, Russia has been downplaying it. Russia has been known to be, lying about statistics. Brazil has been downplaying it, and Bolsonaro is, in my opinion, an idiot strongman. And so now the United States is down there with them, and it's a shame. It's a real shame that we couldn't be like our northern neighbors like Canada and take this seriously and flatten the curve. Now, of course, Canada is more, a different population, but if you look at the ratios, right, we talked about the ratios of cases to 100,000, we're doing terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is interesting, the company that we're in, but to me it's very obvious, Bolsonaro, Putin, and Trump are all, like, I don't want to say anti-science, but they don't believe experts. They don't listen to experts. All, like, these same three countries, their leader doesn't believe in climate change. There's definitely a trend going on here. And I mean, you need to listen to the experts, and we haven't done it. And obviously I get that experts aren't perfect either, but we should have been listening, and we should have been preparing. And the sad thing is we were being warned about this for years, and it's so I don't know. And I saw Sanjay Gupta, the doctor on CNN. He said that what scares him right now is that it almost seems like Americans have just kind of given up. And I get that vibe when I've been around, town and talked to friends and seen people at the market. It kind of just seems like no one gives an F anymore. It's okay, well, I guess this thing's going to ravage our population and whatever. So I understand. I agree with you. I understand why Europe's saying, okay, well, if you guys aren't going to take this seriously, then F off, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's good that they have those. It's good that they have those ability to, reassess every 2 weeks, and they should, right? Because you want to monitor it and make sure your policy is always up to date. But like, I could also see them extending it for a while if we don't get our crap together over here. I mean, I don't think we're going to, though, because it's already so politicized and because so many people have given up. It is just going to run its course at this point, and human lives are gonna be lost that didn't need to be.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, so I want to turn it just a little bit because we've mentioned a loss of human lives and Russia. There's been some pretty interesting revelations the last couple days about, I guess, the Russian government and the Russian military giving bounties and incentives to the Taliban to kill U.S. troops.
Right.
That's pretty alarming. What do you think about that?
Right. I mean, first of all, let's give some historical context that
Yeah.
Russia and the Taliban used to be adversaries. Russia tried to invade Afghanistan a few decades ago, and they lost. Even at the time, Osama bin Laden was even fighting against them. And there's actually a funny article from the New York Times in the '90s calling Osama bin Laden a freedom fighter and a hero because they were fighting. They were fighting Russia off. Right. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Well, the tides have turned the other way, and the same thing has happened. Russia, enemy of my enemy is my friend. The Taliban, something that they fought decades ago, is now an asset to them to disrupt U.S. engagement in the Middle East. And the fact that this has come out, right? Like, first of all, the fact that this is happening is just a shock, right? Because, again, Russia is on paper supposed to be a democracy and, which is, it's not, or it's a faux democracy. But on paper, it's supposed to be this democracy and supposed to be past its dark USSR history and supposed to be into the new modern world. Well, no, I mean, they're not our allies, and they're not our allies at all. And this is pretty grave evidence. Like, this is pretty obvious evidence that they're not our allies. I mean, they're putting hits, money, cash money, guap, on the hits for American soldiers, and telling the Taliban, we'll pay you extra if you kill these guys. They obviously want American soldiers dead. Now, they can't do it with their own soldiers because that would be an actual ground war, so they do it with proxy units like the Taliban. But they're not our allies, and so that alone is like, wow, okay, we're fighting proxy wars with Russia. That's just a fact now, and this is Cold War territory. But what bothers me is that our president, apparently, that what the reports are is that he was briefed on this in March. And since then, he's continued to try to get Russia back into the G7, which used to be the G8. And he's had a history of saying, Putin told me he didn't mess with our elections, and I believe him. And so I see a pretty bad pattern of our leader is not taking Russia seriously, even though some of his advisors are very against Russia. Mike Pompeo is one. Bolton was very, scared and worried about Russia. But Trump himself seems to not take it very seriously. And the fact that he learned about this in March and hasn't done anything about it, or at least publicly hasn't done anything about it, is very worrisome.
Yes, it is. And, I do hope that just because this is coming out in the news right now, I do hope that maybe there is more that they've done behind the scenes. Like, obviously, it'd be much better if he spoke out about it. I still don't think there's enough to know that, okay, well, Trump just turned a blind eye to this. I don't know. And I'm not really going to say either way, but I do hope that just because he speaks nicely about Putin, but that he's actually still, looking out for our interests. Because I am in no agreement with John Bolton on a lot of things, but I know for a fact that he would not be supporting that. He's a war hawk. He is very questionable of international agencies, international countries, everything in general. But I think we're seeing a trend here because we talked back on our Venezuela coup episode, the failed coup in Venezuela. I remember we were talking about, Blackwater and all these other private security forces. And it kind of seems like we have a lot of proxy wars, like unofficial ghost wars with Russia going on right now, because in Turkey and Syria, the same thing is happening. Like Russian mercenaries are funding our enemies. And there's a lot of studies that say that we have definitely been killing each other without knowing it.
Right.
And it is a little alarming to me because with all the other chaos internationally and domestically going on, we kind of keep forgetting that this whole part of the world is quite disastrous. And eventually what happens if we directly kill a Russian or directly kill a Turk or someone else, and it does eventually escalate out of that? Like, I'm just worried that that's inevitable when you hear stories like this, because like you said, the history, the United States and the CIA basically propped up the Mujahideen and then eventually the Taliban to kick the Russians out because of our Cold War interests. And the fact that they are now openly plotting and working together to kill American troops is very disturbing. And I do wish that we had a president who instead of saying, oh, I had no idea, or, it's phony, or blah, 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 why can't he just say, we need to put sanctions on Russia, or we need to have an international community talk to Russia about this, because it's not okay.
Right. That's what worries me the most is, again, I don't know what the truth is. I don't know what actually happened, but the reports are saying Trump was briefed back in March. Trump has now said, in response to all this news that came out just in the last few days, that, I didn't know, I was never briefed. Okay, so what are the potential things? So either he was briefed and he's lying, which is possible, or he was briefed and just doesn't remember, didn't think it was important enough to listen, or which is, by the way, we've also had reports where, they've had to basically boil down massive briefings into 4 slides so that Trump had the attention span to understand it with pictures, you're right. So that's a possibility. They just didn't take it seriously and didn't pay attention enough. Like a tired kid in the back of the class. Or he wasn't briefed. Like he said, I wasn't briefed on this. And that's a problem in and of its own. If our top intelligence agencies, for whatever reason, are not briefing our president on something like this, that's a problem too. And we need to get to the bottom of that. If it's, what really worries me, if it's for the reason that they don't trust Trump with this information, that's super scary. If they think, hey, we got a tip that the Russians are putting hits on our boys in Afghanistan, and we don't want to tell Trump because of how much he talks to world leaders like Xi Jinping and Putin. We want to figure this out in house. That's another big problem. That means our chain of command is completely broken. It means our institutions are cracked and not trusting of each other. The last time 9/11 happened because of our intelligence agencies were not in sync and trusting each other. And now you have it with a loudmouth president where the potential, the fact that there even is a potential that our agencies don't trust our own POTUS is so disturbing. So those are the only things I can think of that would be the options, right? Like they either didn't brief him because they don't want him to have that information, which is bad. He was briefed and he ignored it, or he was briefed and he's lying. None of these are good options. What happened to presidents that said, hey, the buck stops here? It feels like the buck never stops with Trump. It's always someone else's fault with him.
Yeah, completely. And I would almost think that maybe those 3 things are all simultaneously correct. Like, I mean, from Bolton's book, the way he put it, and, I take it with a grain of salt, but basically what he says is that Trump was more focused on the campaign than running the country. And I mean, I think that's very clear with just how his day-to-day process goes, right? Yes. And so I would imagine that the people that, like the intelligence community that would be briefing him on this, maybe do skip some details. But also you have to think that even if they were telling him it, was he listening? Was he busy tweeting? Was he worried about, domestic campaign-based issues? I feel like there's just so many forces working together that competency is just out the door. And the problem is if they didn't tell him, then the right could just say that's another part of the deep state conspiracy, right? They can go off and say, well, now the intelligence community is not even working with the president. So then we go down that rabbit hole. But then on the other side, like it's actually worrying that we don't have a president who is either capable, willing to talk about it, or just relatable with these issues. And I don't know where we really go from here, because I mean, 4 more years, just if we had him for 4 more years, I almost worry. I mean, NATO has come out and just warned that 4 more years of Trump could be real shit. That was their quote. And I think we're seeing that.
I mean, it's like, let's also compare Trump's personal response to a different country that threatened American lives, Iran, right? He said, like, if you kill our boys, like, we will come back hard. We will blow you off the face of the earth. He went on rallies and said, we'll send way more missiles than they send to us. People cheered. He was a real strong man about it. He was, if you're killing our boys, we're going to come get you, right? And that's, it's a pretty easy political win for presidents. Bush did the same thing after 9/11. They'll hear from us very soon and very loud. People cheered him on. That's kind of what you expect when people are like killing American soldiers or taking American lives. The president is going to be pretty strong against that. But then now we know that Russia is conspiring. I mean, we had one of the deadliest years last year in 2019 with our troops in Afghanistan. We don't know how many of those, or I at least don't know how many of those were a result of Russian hits. But it had to at least play a factor in the Taliban's actions. If a foreign nation starts throwing money your way, so like, you know, to me it's like, I mean, that's, you could pretty much argue this is an act of war, if not right up to that line. And what's Trump's response been? Oh, I didn't know about it. That's not an appropriate response. That's not even a response at all, in my opinion. I mean, what? Okay. You didn't know about it. Well, what are you going to do about it then? You know about it now.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think that's a good comparison with Iran. I mean, they did something, I mean, half-assed compared to what apparently, like, reportedly Russia's doing. And, you know, it's fire and fury.
And we assassinated someone in response.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember when we talked about Soleimani, I actually wasn't dramatically against it at the time, and I guess I still am not. But sometimes it requires a response like that as the leader, like you said. But I maybe it's just me being a conspiracy theorist here, but I feel like there just has to be something with Trump and Russia, and I don't know if it's political or business, but I mean, you know, the U.S. under Trump is pulling out of Afghanistan. You have this Russian connection. He never wants to speak out about Putin. I don't know, man. It's just, you know, we talked about Occam's razor, and sometimes, you know, the conspiracy fits. And like, to me, the simplest solution in this is that there is a connection. There is something linking the two. And maybe it's not that nefarious, but we just don't know because there's no transparency. We never get anywhere with these because of the politicization of all these investigations, you know, but it just seems like there has to be something there.
Yeah. And again, for me, it's just so many examples of anytime something goes right, he takes full credit. And anytime something goes wrong, he just passes the buck to someone else or says, I didn't know.
True.
Or I wasn't briefed. And like, dude, that's just not a good response, man. If we have reports that you know about a conspiracy of a foreign nation to hire hits on our soldiers for months, you can't just say, oh, I didn't know. Like, that's not you know. So I mean, I hope that I'm ignorant in this subject. I hope that the Pentagon and Trump have been working for months with secret plans and different ways to, you know, talk with allies and get back with Russia and make sure our troops in Afghanistan are safe. I really hope that's what it is, and I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't think that's the case. Time and time again, we've seen a massive disconnect between the Pentagon and Trump, between our intelligence agencies and Trump. And this is what happens. This is what happens when you have years of this decay in our institutions.
Yeah, completely. And, you know, I mean, I like to hope that potentially maybe what happened is Trump's ego, right? Like you said, he's very quiet when it's not a positive look for his campaign and his administration. And maybe we can hope that behind the scenes they have done things about this, but he doesn't want to publicize it because it's not good for his image, and he's definitely an egomaniac. But who knows? But it's unfortunate. I think there's a rot, like a long, dry rot inside of our institutions, and this is why we're here. But from the travel ban to the Taliban, here we are.
Well, and looking forward, I mean, I know we're going to have to wrap this episode up quick, but looking forward, I hope that whoever is president in the next 4 years, whether it's Trump or Biden, I hope that we really start to take Russia seriously. I mean, this is, you know, let's not forget that Russia annexed Crimea not that long ago, you know, with like black operation mercenaries going in on unmarked black helicopters. They took over Crimea. And so, you know, Russia is a bad actor, and now we know that they're targeting our troops with money hits, like out of a mob movie. I mean, we're going to have to tackle this beast eventually, and I just hope that we have the institutions and the allies to do so.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess my last thought on that is, I think Trump's been the peak of this, the apex of it, but unfortunately, we haven't seen a lot of presidents over the last 10 years do too much with Russia. You know, George W. Bush kind of was buddy-buddy with Putin, and then Barack Obama did kind of half-assed respond to Crimea and he was always apologetic to Russia and some of our other, like, I guess, quote unquote.
They kicked him out of the G8, and since then, I mean, look, I mean, that's kind of a slap on the wrist compared to annexing an entire oil peninsula like Crimea. But I mean, since then, Russia has been trying to get back into the G8, right? Now called the G7. And guess who's been the biggest cheerleader for that idea is Donald Trump.
Yeah, and no, there's nothing I could argue with that. I just think Trump's the culmination, and Putin's kind of realized he can get away with things, and now he's doing that.
Yeah.
So like I always say, I don't think Trump's the actual disease. He's just unfortunately a symptom of this rot, this problem.
Could be.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you have any more thoughts, but if not, thanks everyone for listening. Well, are you going to Europe this summer? I hope you've changed your tickets. Other than that, let us know what you think. We're on YouTube, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, those other blah, blah, blah sites, and let us know what you think. Have a great day, and we'll see you later. Thanks.
Take care.